Hi everyone. This screencast is going to talk about how I have moved from the face-to-face lab to an online lab. So let's get started. Okay, so this is the announcements page in Blackboard for my face-to-face class. If you're in my hybrid class, it's going to look a little different, but the important items I'm going to talk about are going to be the same. The navigation will be a little different, but everything else will be the same. So first I'm going to go to the lab folder, and in the lab folder you'll see folders for the two labs that we covered before we went on spring break, and the first lab that we're going to cover after spring break, which is when classes start on Monday, March 30th. So for the previous labs, you want to be able to study the anatomy that we've already covered. So how do you do that? So when we had access to the learning lab, you'd go into the learning lab and you'd study it there. Since you don't have access to the study lab or learning lab, I had to find another way for you to study the models. And the solution I have come up with is using these Quizlets that I have prepared, right? So if you go to exercise 10, 12, and 13, the first lab, you'll see the very first item is the Quizlet, and you'll click on there to access the Quizlet. I'm still working on that Quizlet, so for an example, I'm going to use the Quizlet for exercise 11. All right, so after the pre-lab, which you should have already done, in fact, this shouldn't even show up now, will be the Quizlet for brain and cranial nerves. If you click on that, it'll take you directly to the Quizlet. So for each lab, I will be making a Quizlet. That Quizlet includes a set of cards, as they're called, that will cover every single item that is listed on your study guide. So there is nothing on the study guide that you won't find in the Quizlet sets that I am making for you. So if you know everything on the Quizlet, you know every possible thing I could ask you on the practical or on a quiz. Okay? Now in a separate video, I'm going to talk about how to use Quizlets, but I will show you the flashcards, and I think those are going to be very important. So there are flashcards that you can view these sets of cards as flashcards where you're able to identify different structures, and this is going to be great because this is exactly what you're going to be expected to do on a practical. Right? So you can say, well, identify the major brain region. Well, what is this region of the brain? Do you know? If you thought the cerebrum, you are correct. And again, there's a card for every item that's covered on your study guide. So this is a great way to study the material from the actual models that you're going to be tested on. The only difference is you won't be able to put your hands on these models, but you'll be able to see them, and you'll be able to to learn the material in a similar manner that you would learn them in the learning lab. Okay, so for labs they're already covered. Basically, the Quizlets are going to be used in place of the learning lab. In another video, as I said, I'll talk about these different features of Quizlet that you can use to study. Okay, so you're going to use Quizlet to practice the material for labs that you've already had. What about the labs that you have yet to have, like exercise 8, joints and body movements, and exercise 9, gross anatomy of the muscular system, which you'll have next week? So for all of the upcoming labs, this is pretty much the flow of what you'll need to do to prepare for lab, what you'll do to replace what you would have been doing in lab and the learning lab. And then practice practical, and the practical will pretty much be similar to what you did before. Of course, all of this is going to be online, so the practical is going to be online. So every week, these are the different items that you'll need to cover. So you will still be doing pre-labs, and you'll still be having a quiz. Your pre-lab is due every Friday at midnight. Your quiz, which covers the material from the previous week, is also due Friday at midnight. This does not mean that you should be doing like everything on Friday. Basically, I'm giving you the entire week to do to work on your own. And I'm trying to have a common due date for everything. When you choose to do what is completely up to you, but so it's easy to remember when things are due. Everything is due Friday at midnight. So next week, you should complete the pre-lab for joints and body movements. You should complete the quiz, which covers the previous week's or previous lab, which is brain and cranial nerves. And that quiz is going to be located where all your other online quizzes for lecture is found. And both of those are due Friday by midnight. Now, they'll be available all of next week, starting on Monday, if not before. But they have to be done by Friday at midnight. Typically, when you come to lab, after you take your quiz, I would give a presentation on the lab material. That lab presentation is going to be posted to Blackboard. So if we go to next week's lab, you'll see the pre-lab listed first. Then here's the lab presentation. In addition, for this lab, I've also included a link to a video made by another A&P instructor where he literally identifies a bunch of different muscles on models. So I thought that might be helpful as well. And then you're going to complete the Quizlet that I have designed for the Muscles and Movement Lab to help you learn the material as you would in lab, and also to practice the material as you would be doing in the learning lab. So going back to this chart, your regular lab time and your learning lab are basically going to be replaced by the lab presentation online and the Quizlet. Now, within the Quizlets, there are different learning activities that you can engage in. I think for like a sort of introduction to the material, sort of like what you get in lab, where you're using your lab manual and you're using sometimes your book to identify structures on the model. The Quizlet Learn and the Quizlet Test features are good to start off with, but with these two features, the words are in front of you. So eventually you want to progress to what you'd be doing in a learning lab and use the Quizlet Write feature. And if you need some help with spelling, the Quizlet Spell feature and the Quizlet flashcards. Because with the flashcards, you're just shown the image of the model or an image from your book. And you have to come up with the answer so the words aren't in front of you. So this portion, the lab presentation and the Quizlets, are going to take the place of what you would normally be doing in the lab and in the learning lab. All right. And this will be what we do every week. And then the week, the last week before the practical, as always, you'll have a practice practical. It'll be in the same location it's been. And then you'll take your practical, and your practical will open on Thursday at 8 a.m. and and it will close Friday at midnight. Do you see the common theme? Everything is going to be due Friday at midnight. So it's easy to remember. When is your quiz due? Friday at midnight. When is your pre-lab due? Friday at midnight. When is your practical due? Friday at midnight. As for your practical, the practical will be online. It will be in the same location that your quizzes will be found. So we'll go back to Blackboard here. So if we go here to assignments, right, there are currently no quizzes open, but this is where all of your quizzes for lecture will be or have been. Likewise, this is where your exams will be for lecture now, and this is also where your lab practicals will be. Now let's just take a moment before I end to take a look at the syllabus. The schedule specifically, so next week, starting on March 30th when we return, the lab that we're going to cover is gross anatomy of the muscles and movement, exercise 8 and 9. Friday the 3rd at midnight, the quiz, which covers the previous lab, the pre-lab, which covers the current lab, will be due Friday at midnight. You should also complete everything associated with that lab. So you should have watched my presentation on that lab and started the Quizlets. What's very important is that you don't get behind. The following week, we'll cover the lab on eye and ear. You'll have a quiz that covers the previous lab. You'll have a pre-lab for that lab, and they're both due Friday at midnight. Week 12, we'll have our practical. There's no new lab. That practical will open 8 o'clock on Thursday, and it will close Friday at midnight. Okay? So I hope that this has helped shed some light on how the lab online will proceed. I think once you get started and we interact during a lecture where you have the opportunity to ask questions, this will make more sense to you. I'm going to constantly ask for feedback so that I know if this is working, where there are areas for improvement. And this is new territory for me as it is for you. And so I'm going to be sort of building the plane while flying it. Thank you very much, and have a great day.